on that note, I want to broaden the conversation a little bit now, because some people actually made watching your program, Soledad, Black in America 2, into a teaching opportunity. George Daniels is actually a professor at the University of Alabama, and he actually watched the program with 20 or so of his students and faculty and staff, and then he shared the group's reaction via iReport. There were some differences of opinion, shall we say, and Professor Daniels is joining us now via Skype. Professor Daniels, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to let you and Soledad chat about your perception of Black in America 2. Why don't you just tell us what you thought generally of the program?
I think it was generally very well done. I'm looking at it from the perspective of a broadcast journalist. You covered a lot of ground in 2 hours, and I think you at least fulfill the promise of trying to address solutions, because last year's installment was a little more focused on issues and problems. At the same time, when we watched it as a group last night, the reactions to the program were not all very positive. In fact, the concerns that were expressed were primarily that there was overemphasis on what's happening in Africa and underemphasis on what's happening here in the United States, that because there was so much time devoted to that during the first hour of the documentary, some people even tuned out. We had some in our group who left after just about 45 minutes, 1 hour. But at the same time, if they stayed and watched till the second hour, they were able to see other topics that were addressed in not as much depth, however. And that was the other concern, that some of the pieces were not addressed in as much depth. There was also some discussion about the selection of the individuals who were interviewed, that they seemed to reflect certain physical characteristics that were fairly common. So our conversations and our discussions were on a wide range, kind of what Soledad was talking about earlier. And the big question, do I see my experience in the program? But everybody's going to ask that kind of question.
You know, it's so funny when you say that, because of course you think, wow, having a bunch of broadcast journalists review your work is terrifying, isn't it? Because they're all thinking, well, had I done it that way, I would have done it some completely different way. And yet it's also wonderful because I love hearing that feedback. I think the question, as you say, about is my experience reflected, again, that has to be a wide-ranging, sometimes no, sometimes yes. After the first Black in America, my mother, who loved the documentary, said, oh, so no Afro-Cubans in your documentary. You didn't want to put your own people in. Truly, I get that. I totally understand that feedback. I think, though, that when someone says the story of Africa is overtold, that is not a story of Africa. That is a story of a woman who takes kids to a location. It could have been Africa. Later, she takes them to New Orleans. She takes them to Washington, D.C., but we happen to shoot the part about Africa. It's not about Africa. It's a story of a woman who decides to expand somebody's horizons. Those are kids here. Those are American children going on a trip. Some of those kids haven't left Brooklyn, haven't gone on the 5 subway stops to get into Manhattan. So I think when people look at it like, oh, that was a story about Africa, they really don't fully understand what that story is about.
And isn't it partly, Soledad, about these kids understanding what they have, even though here in the U.S. they may be disadvantaged? When they go to South Africa, they understand the gifts they have, what they can do for another person.
I think Malak clearly wanted kids who she thinks don't always value education to see kids who are desperate to be educated. Children who would give their right arms if they could go to school easily. If they didn't have to buy the uniform, they didn't have to buy the books, they didn't have to go through all these hurdles to get educated. I think Malak wanted her kids to see these children who are desperate to be good students. Desperate. I think she thought that that would have a big impact, and it did. It did. Those kids seeing education through a different prism was very moving for them. No question about it.
Keep in mind the idea of having an impact, though. We know as broadcast journalists, the best stories are often the extremes. And I think that was another concern is, yes, she wanted it to have an impact, but in the process of trying to find an example that has an impact, sometimes you miss those in the middle, the everyday Joes and Janes in middle America who are leaders and who are having an impact, but they may not be the best story. And in television,
I think you'll see tonight. I think you'll see tonight as we do. You see the other half of the documentary. When we talk again, you'll say, "Oh, I take that back," because I actually think that we, I look at someone like Steve Perry as a guy who's in the middle. He is. He deals with students who are in impoverished conditions, but Steve Perry is doing very well. Steve Perry is a middle-class black man, happily married with a beautiful wife and 2 lovely children, all of whom are in the documentary. The doctors in Project Brotherhood are all middle-class, successful men with families. Absolutely. We will profile a woman who is a breast cancer surgeon, who is a doctor, middle-class black woman from Long Island. So I have to disagree. I think that you can look at those stories and say that's not the middle class, but I just disagree. They're absolutely reflected also. I think the range of stories was reflected. And again, the truth is, in documentary telling, often you pick one story, and you don't have to say it's the definitive story. It can be just a wonderful story that illuminates a number of issues that move people. I mean, I don't look at documentaries as saying, so I've got these 30 things to cover, and these X type of people, and X range of skin tones. Let me make sure I get to all of that. And then done, then we add it up, make sure it times out to just under 4 hours, and we're done. I mean, that's not how you tell stories. You find a Steve Perry, and you find a Glorious Menifee, and you make sure that they rip your heart out because they're wonderful. And it's not just because she's in extreme poverty, it's because Glorious Menifee wants something so badly. Glorious Menifee could be a middle-class kid. She wants something so badly. And Steve Perry, who is middle class, he wants something so badly, which is for his kids to succeed. That's a moving story, and it's the color of his skin, the color of her skin, where they live, and the car they drive is kind of irrelevant in a good story.
I have a sense that the two of you could probably discuss this
we could, couldn't we?
the rest of the day. It's a great conversation, but for now I want to thank you very much, Professor Daniels, for joining us, because we do want to carry on and introduce just a few more of those stories.
I'd love for him to interview. Will you email me after you watch the second night, Professor, and tell me what your students think?
I will do that again. We'll watch them tonight.
I would love it. Thank you.